for Budget and Tax Policy in studios. Karibu, Ndugu Katabazi.
Good morning, and good morning to our viewers.
Okay. Later on Zoom, we'll be also joined with Alan Mujisha, the tax director for the ED for tax. ED Tax Director, Ernest & Young, Uganda, will be joining us later on Zoom. The discussion is on previewing our budget 2021-2022. Welcome, and I'll start with you, Mr. Katabazi. Let's get into the budget. Of course, by this time, you have known the budget, you've seen the budget, you've debated, you've discussed the budget, and it's just waiting to be given to the public. What should the people expect to actually understand in the budget that is coming on this afternoon?
Yes, the budget process has been on for some time, and unlike a period before 2015, now we know the budget before it is read. Prior to the Public Finance Management Act of 2015, you would read the budget, the President would lead the process of reading the budget.
Surprise there.
And then surprises would come at that point. So it was a period with a lot of anxiety. So, but now, for those who have been following the budget processes, you know what is coming up even before the budget speech. So because by law, Public Finance Management Act, the national budget is supposed to be passed by 31st of May. So it is already passed. So, but this process again is equally very important because number one, it communicates government priorities, but also provides information to the public on what to expect during the budget implementation. So, the overview of the budget, in my perspective, is that this budget is almost the same as the one that we had last financial year. So because last financial year, we had about 45 trillion. Now we have 44.7 trillion that has been passed to finance programs of government. And it is also important that we inform our viewers and listeners that unlike the last financial year's budget, this year's budget is constructed alongside programs. The previous budget is prior to this year that we're ending, was centered on votes, and this year marks a shift to program-based budgeting, and in line with aspirations of our National Development Plan, Plan 3. So that is why now it might need a lot of explaining to the people so that they understand. So of the leading programs that we have at play, we have the Human Capital Development Program. And I think among the priorities, this is the one that is fetching a lot of money. Then we have governance and security. This is where now, so in the Human Capital Development, you have education sector, rather, we have education sector that are in, you have the health sector in, and you have social development in there. So these are the programs that relate to development of humans. Then, of course, you have governance and security. That's where defense and security matters come in. Then you have integrated transport services. This is where the Ministry of Works comes in. This is where you have the UNRWA and then the road fund, and then other components under local governments that support infrastructure development. So the list goes on to accommodate agro-industry services. That's the former agriculture sector that has been enhanced to put in the agriculture. Then you have tourism, the ICT, the Mindset Change program that come at the lowest, on the lowest step in terms of funding. So overall, there are 18 programs that we are budgeting, and all of those 18 programs are expected to spend in the next financial year 28 trillion. So if you made a 28 trillion against the budget of 44.7 trillion, then you will understand that the other components will go to paying loans and paying interest.
Okay. Ndugu Vuni, yes. Karibu, you do the planning for us, and years ago, there was always excitement when people are going to, or when the budget was going to be read. Yes. People would wait, sit, listen to and that excitement has since eluded us. And what you now and the budget itself? Why do you think people are no longer very excited about budgets? Is it because it's not real to us, or people think with or without we can still make a living?
No, actually, as he alluded to, by the mere fact that the budget process commenced way before, the budget has already been approved by Parliament. That already, of course, takes away the surprise element in the budget. But of course, still the budget remains important because on this budget day, we communicate it so well in context so that actually the priorities are clearly highlighted. People know what's going on. And the budget is, of course, I would encourage people who may think, but I don't think the excitement has waned, but just that in our operations in the whole budget process, we are very transparent. We involve everyone. Actually, we are one of the most transparent in budget when you consider the budget process across Africa, because of the level of involvement of the civil society, academia, different individuals, different stakeholders from the private sector. So they already have their input, even way before the budget is read. But at the same time, of course, there are always emerging issues that come up. For instance, of course, in our planning, if I can say refer to this COVID outbreak, in our planning, we had already not foreseen, but we had run scenarios where we knew that a second lockdown would maybe come with a second wave. So that risk we already factored into our planning and our numbers. And of course, this also came recently, but at least it doesn't take away the long-term objective, for instance, of, say, government trying to vaccinate people to try and contain COVID. So of course, for instance, this budget, or until the last day, different emerging issues come up. For instance, now we see the surge in COVID. So I'm sure, and I know that maybe the budget is going to highlight the short-term measures of how we shall contain this COVID. Maybe in the budget process, in the discussions, this did not come out, because maybe matters for us, we had run the scenarios, but these were risks to our projections. So, just to conclude, so the budget, at least now, for instance, is, as it is read out, it will be able to give you short-term solutions to these emerging problems, which have come out of the blue, which just came maybe a few weeks ago. So, and then, of course, without getting off from our long-term objective.
You normally, after budgets have been read, you, the experts, have certain words that you normally use. There is what you also call a pro-people budget. Those come on, especially after reading the budget. People saying, well, it's a good budget. It is a pro-people budget. And I think we've heard about pro-people budgets not once, not twice, not three times, but quite a number of times. And at the end of the day, people come back and ask and say, we just got a pro-people budget, last budget reading. What has happened? Where are the services? Because people at the end of the day, they want the services. So just talk about that itself. The budgets are, yes, are pro-people, but are they achievable? Are these things that we do routinely because there's a cycle to do it, or really it is intended to help the people?
If I can, thank you. If I can actually make reference to the current budget, the focus you'll actually see is that it is focusing on sustaining the recovery we had attained. If you can look at the start of this financial year, we can see that we're a bit resilient compared to other economies, and the economy has been growing. But specifically to this budget, if you can look at the interventions for the vulnerable households that were most affected, the poor people who were trying to get out of the subsistence economy and then put them into the money economy. If you look at the interventions, if we look at the interventions being spelled out by this budget, we have also come up with new interventions like the parish development model. This is where basically the development planning and development programs will be initiated at parish level, and this is just to focus on inclusive growth. So with specific reference to this budget, I can say actually it is very pro-poor, and even the implementation is very clear on what the target is and where we want to go.
Ndugu Katabazi, talk about the budgets, the pro-people budgets, and we're spending, of course, a lot of money, especially onto infrastructure development. But we keep saying these are pro-people budgets, but at the end of the day, people again demand for services, and we keep rotating over and over again.
Now, our concept of pro-poor might certainly differ from one person to the other, considering, of course, the fact that pro-poor budget would mean that the budget's focus is entirely, in my view, or a substantial part focused on dealing with problems of the poor, or programs that can get people out of poverty and prevent others from sliding into poverty. And this would be extremely important because whereas the recently published National Household Survey indicated that poverty rates had slightly gone down, it revealed that the numbers of people who are in poverty actually grew. For example, the last household survey of 2016 did reveal that 8 million Ugandans were in poverty. Now, this one says an additional 300,000 people have gone into poverty. So now, effectively, 8.3 million people are in poverty. And when you read through the report, you will discover that there are people who, by the last National Household Survey, were well-to-do, but this time around, they went into poverty. But you also find that there are those who were captured in the poverty numbers who have. So there's been some little bit of oscillation. And that is precisely because most of our people are preoccupied in agricultural sector. And sometimes, if foot-and-mouth disease hits and there is a quarantine, that a family that is relying on cattle will definitely suffer. If there is a drought, extensive drought in a region of the country, that region suffers. If, for example, for us who come from the border districts, if there's instability along the border area, like the closure of border between Uganda and, so the trading communities around that will certainly experience some financial shocks. And definitely COVID-19 is also part of the example. So the question, to answer the questions, one would want to look at the budget and see exactly whether the budget is responding to some of the indicators that I have talked about. Yes, unlike ever before, this budget tends to address the long-standing question of decentralization, because when decentralization was put into effect, still we saw scenarios where money would be, instead of being sent to the local government, money would be sent to, it would be spent at the center. So you find a ministry which is supposed to be leading policy and also supervision, being the one actually implementing activities, yet the local government would certainly be the ones at the forefront. So now, in the parish development model that he has highlighted, I think it presents us with an opportunity, number one, to deal with problems that are affecting people at the lowest
where they are
level possible. I know some people have been complaining that the money being allocated is very small. I still think that for a start, that is sufficient. For a start, that is sufficient. Because this year that is coming up should be able to give us an opportunity to evaluate the parish model and see whether it is working before we determine how much money we need to invest in. But at a theoretical level, investing 38 million for a year in a parish is economically significant in a sense that there are some parishes I know of, including the whole sub-county I know of in Uganda, whose population may not, if you put them together, may not spend that money.
38?
Yes, 38 million. It is possible. So now, if on average, a sub-county has about 7 parishes, on average. So if you get 38 times 7, yes, you're talking about over 250 million that will be spent in that local unit.
Is that too much money for that local unit?
When you consider the structural flow of income,
it's too much. You
can find that 250 million, if used very well, can generate $1 billion. I want to give you an example. Jagenda gets 100,000, but he has a debt with Davis over 100,000. So you will give it to him. But also I supplied Davis with my heifer, over 100,000. He will give it to me. But also I bought foods at a food store.
From Ruatoro?
Yes, from Ruatoro, and I also give it to him. So you find like 100,000.
Has solved 4 problems.
If we are in the market.
Because Davis no longer chases Jagenda for anything.
Yes. So you find that 100,000 has solved problems worth 1 million. So that is under the theory of circular flow of income. So it means that as long as people are productive, a small push creates a bigger impact at that level. So, but for that to be very effective, government must ensure that if we are saying that this money is going to be spent at the parish, the key players should be people who are members of that community. But because if you are not careful, some people are going to come from other places to come and take advantage of this. If, for example, there's a procurement element that is attached, or there's a credit bit that is attached, you find somebody comes. So you find that might destabilize the economics of that.
Let me understand this, Mr. Katabazi. Yes. According to the budget, I think they appropriated about 268 or 258, well, about 260 billion shillings for the parish development model. And we talk about, I think, 10,000 parishes. Do we have those? About 10,000 parishes in the whole country. And those that mooted the parish model, I think the Ministry of Local Governments, they needed about 1 trillion shillings. They needed about 1 trillion shillings, but had to settle for just this particular. Is this too much money for the parishes, or it is too little money for the parishes?
I mean, it's little, but it is sufficient for a start.
Okay.
Because you see, you do not want to implement something, to pilot something, and you want to invest in a lot of money without, first of all, seeing how it will take off in the first place. Because now, because we've been struggling with accountability at the center, accountability issues at the local government. Now you're at the sub-county. Now you're cascading down, involve the lowest unit. So you need to first of all see how structures for implementing this take shape, and then progressively put in money. So if the anticipated expenditure was 1 trillion, for example, we should then see, from the Minister of Finance perspective, a deliberate strategy of incremental, seeing how it has worked. So every year they keep adding, and they realize that one. It would be wrong to say we want 1 trillion and you give it to implement something that is starting.
Okay.
So that's an element of a poor budgeting. But then also for me, and I've already said this before here with you, that if we do not invest in clear-cut social protection interventions, and especially so during this problem of uncertainty and challenges brought forth by COVID-19, then we risk having people every other day sliding back into poverty. Much as we are talking about the parish model and forces of demand and supply, there are people that we have in our communities who, by the nature of their circumstances, will never fit into the forces of demand and supply, who need a little bit of push. And that is why I think these programs for youth, programs for women, programs for older persons need to be strongly emphasized, because you are likely to have a road, as an example, the integrated transport services being, you create a road and the outcome would be that people are going to dry cassava.
On the roads, on the tarmac.
On the tarmac. Because you're having development of infrastructure that is running ahead of the growth of an ordinary person in that community. So that ultimately means that if you created this road to enable the community access the market more effectively, but the same community's capacity to produce has not been enhanced, then ultimately becomes a welfare fund. So that's why a match and mix between programs that affect people and programs that look at infrastructure, that match and mix would be very, very important going forward.
Okay, Vudi, back to here and talk about the priorities, because when we are budgeting, priorities are very important. And like you said, we do not normally prioritize the social protection aspect of it. That's why we live in that cycle of, you know, trying every other time. We all begin as in one or another. Just look at the priorities now in the wake of COVID-19, because you know, COVID is, we're walking 2 steps ahead, then 5 steps backwards because of COVID.
Yes.
Have we set right our priorities as a country?
Yes, actually, when you look at this budget, yeah, we have clear priorities. We have priorities, of course, in we are looking at how to industrialize our country, how to get people out of poverty, how to different priorities, but all these are linked because, of course, there's industrialization, you have infrastructure needs, you have, yeah, the social protection you talked about. Actually, it's also there. But all these are interlinked, and the way the budget envisages that, the way we envisage at implementing this budget is actually not to do one thing piecemeal, doing a road and then it is far ahead and the people are still poor, they can only dry cassava. Or, yeah, this budget, at least all the focus areas are interlinked. One is leading to another, and you can see a very good coordination within it. Yeah, but also the long-term impact of this COVID, like we said, this budget, we have, of course, in the long term, right now we are going to, we are focused on containing the COVID virus amidst this second surge. And how quickly we get out of it, of course, will also depend on what the budget has identified. Because for us to get back to normal economic activity, then we all need to support government vaccination efforts. This budget will focus on vaccination because that's the long-term goal. If we are again to normalize and interact with the rest of the world, trade with others comfortably, have free movement across countries, for FDI to flow in and jobs to be created, vaccination is the way to go, and the budget is focused on it, and we think that actually with good vaccination, then the country will come back to normal, and then the focus on the priority areas. This stop-start, I think, will stop with effective vaccination when a critical mass has been vaccinated. For now, of course, it is people haven't really been actively, they haven't been enthusiastic, but hopefully, now that we know the dangers, now that this second wave has been a wake-up call to all of us, including following the SOPs, and yeah, so after the short-term, the very short-term containment measures, maybe even the 42 days, if the vaccine could come later and then a critical mass is vaccinated, then I think that's the long-term view, and the budget is already taking care of that.
The cost of public administration in Uganda also causes a lot of talks amongst the people. It's too hefty, and for very few people of the population. How will we address this?
Yeah, of course, yeah, public administration is, we know, is very critical. Though I think we can be efficient, the budget is looking at, if you actually, the budget focus, we are already thinking about ways of reducing the cost of public administration, even mainly through the budget, but even from cabinet, they've already talked about what they'll do. Rationalization, for instance, of different, trying to cut generally costs and government expenditure across different units. All that is part of public administration. There's rationalization, bringing different units and maybe reducing on some of the unnecessary or duplicate expenditures. That is being talked about. But then public administration also, when you look at, want to look at, say, public investment management. We have, of course, people have always said maybe this road, the road in here maybe costs double what the other road would cost. All that is public administration. So now we have put in place a public investments management strategy. It basically looks at the assessment of the entire project life cycle, from basically inception to conclusion through implementation and then evaluation. And because all those things have been streamlined, we expect, normally whenever looking at that aspect of public expenditure, for instance, because whenever you're investing in a project, you expect growth returns. So if a project is delayed, maybe it's not within time or within cost, then you may not expect to get the anticipated returns you had planned or you had based your plans for the country upon. So with this new development, for instance, we see that projects are being worked on time. So at least there's value for money, for the taxpayers' money, as we go forward. So I think as long as yeah, mainly from the rationalization point of view, we appreciate that, yeah, government can run it more efficiently, but also at the same time, even what are the growth returns we get from these projects? Because I think that should be the more important question. Where we have invested, how much is the return? And are we getting that return on time? And yeah, we have seen so many reforms within the ministry. We have seen audits being carried out. We have seen we are moving to e-government. E-government is where mainly for instance, e-government procurement, it's coming on board, and all other government processes. So these are processes that actually eliminate most of the time face-to-face interaction. These are systems that will create fairness, because even the government officer or whoever is doing something will not interface with anyone. And these are done on time. There are timelines. And then there's a lot of transparency. For instance, in e-government procurement, once it is rolled out, in e-government procurement, you will discover that if I'm a supplier, these days I don't have to call you to check on anything. I'll see progress. And this will reduce corruption. This will reduce delays. And this is what will give us the growth returns we anticipate. Okay. So I think actually the focus should be there. For our investment, how much do we get in return for that?
Okay. Ndugu Patrick, the same question that is been answering is what I still want to pose to you. Look at the size of our economy. We normally talk about our economy, its size, and of course, we also talk about public administration. For example, people now are into the discussions over, look at the size of cabinet, look at the size of parliament, look at the size of all these other local government units, and look at the size of our economy, because we are expanding, getting more seats, but we're not doing enough to expand the economy itself. Now, with a very small resource envelope that we're tapping from, but with a very big administration or administrative structure in there, are there ways of managing this to see that we actually manage our budgets in a way, and also do the debt financing?
I think I look at public administration in many ways. I look at it in terms of expenses at a political level. That's where we have cabinet, and we have parliament, and the other political units, councils and others. But then I also look at it at the level of technical, how much money we spend on running government from the technical administration perspective. And I say that the expenses that we make to support public administration are way too high compared to actually what should have been the case. At the political level, I think they say democracy is a cost, but I think we have either democratized or we have created unnecessary centers of power. For example, the framers of our constitution imagined that our cabinet to be about
21.
Rather 21. But now, if you add cabinet ministers and ministers of state, those are going to be up 80 people. So those come with expenses, of course, attached to their office. And some of those expenses are so huge to the extent that the monies, if saved, would have made some tremendous contribution to development. I'll give an example. A cabinet minister's car, on average, would be about 300 million. So, but we are already talking about the 38 million at the parish level. So those would be how many parishes that would benefit from that. Or those would be how many centers that would get that. Parliament, these fellows now do not have where to sit. You heard now they are going to be sitting in Korolo to accommodate social distancing. And of course, they can't fit in the chamber. Even if we didn't have COVID, they are constructing another one. So creating administrative units every now and then impose a very, very serious cost on our budget, and money that would have otherwise done other things will be spent. Technically, the issue of public administration has been of great concern over us for some time now. We are happy that government had moved to merge certain administrative units. A move that was projected to save about 1 trillion shillings on our national budget. Although, of course, our concern again is that that process is very slow. This budget that is being presented today should give us a plan on when and how this is going to be implemented. Because my understanding of the budget that was framed still has these organizations budgeted for. And yet we've been seeing letters flying all over the place, talking about merging, talking about there are those that are merging, there are those that are being abolished, and something like that. Maybe my colleague, Davis, would give us a plan on how government will implement this. But I would think that that is a clear-cut realization that we are spending money that we don't need to spend. And that government is now possibly thinking, right. But I think it can do much better if the objective is to save resources, let them merge, reduce that, but also let us put a halt at creation of more administrative units. Because for every administrative unit that is created, it becomes an additional cost center, and that's into money that will. How does it do so? If we said that the budget for human capital development is ranking #1 as a priority, if you ask me the question as whether I'm happy with it, I will say mixed. I am happy because it's #1, and it's human capital development. But I'm not necessarily happy because where is that money going to be spent? Money that is in education sector. You would be, when you look at the numbers, majority, the biggest part of that money goes to salaries. And because teachers are so many, so when you add the salaries for every teacher and all those things together, you find that the budget is so big, but again, the money that is dedicated for infrastructure, education infrastructure improvement, delivery of the education service is rather small. So that's what we talk about when we have an expansive administrative structure, that a lot of money goes into salaries, wage and non-wage. So if rationalization happens, merging happens, are you serious? No, not so relevant. I wish you say not so relevant units are abolished. A halt at creation of administration, then we can save more money to develop, to put into now actual human capital, support mindset change program would be very critical. The local government decentralization model would be effectively implemented.
Okay, Vuni, he talked about the mergers, and we just need to know where that is, because we've looked at it, and you talk about ministries or ministers now in this case. And the discussion now, as Patrick has just talked about the size of cabinet now, people will tell you, you have a minister here and you have all this and this and this. But then you notice that under this one ministry, you have another 3, 4, 5 agencies of government, 5 parastatals. And you notice that as we're discussing one minister here, but we have 5 EDs here getting a lot of money, I think even more than what the minister gets. That part also explains that. So there was an idea of the mergers here. Duplication of duties. We have different organizations virtually giving the same service to the people. You, the planners now, because you plan for a country, you're in charge of all the things. What are we doing about this particular one to see? And what really happens if we've merged one parastatal onto another or back to the ministry, and you look at now the ED there, the deputy ED here, and all the others, what happens? Yeah,
actually, of course, just before this show started, we're talking about the plan we have, especially anchored on the National Development Plan. And National Development Plan 3. And of course, at least we haven't shied away from implementing reforms as and when they've come, and we think this is the best way to go. At least we have always embraced and implemented reforms. So part of that, the rationalization and the merging, of course, it's being considered, and it's going to, a roadmap is going to be presented, I think, in future, shortly in future. But the most important thing now is the reform on the program approach, the programmatic approach in the budget, which is based on what the NDP3 envisages. He highlighted the 18 programs. So these 18 programs, they are just not programs for anyone, if you just hear, but it is what they are delivering upon. What are the deliverables per program? So if we have 10 EDs Actually, that is why this debate is all coming up, because if we have 10 EDs maybe under human capital development, so what's your contribution? Maybe you've been working in a silo, you've been doing, I've been doing what maybe once in a while KP does. So if we don't have that coordination, so this program approach is more focused on removing those silos first and foremost for implementation, to have good coordination, so that if we are all contributing to one outcome, if we are all contributing to one thing, then we need to be budgeted for under the same roof, under the same resource, so that even in implementation, we can ably see that maybe here you are duplicating, maybe there's a lot of wastage here. And I believe this current budget actually has started on the program approach of the NDP3, but that is, of course, in implementation. But the focus also of the program approach is we shifted from what we used to call the output approach. For instance, your deliverable would be your spending. Would know that you've worked by maybe spending. If you're supposed to construct a school, if I was supposed to say construct 10 schools as accounting officer, I've constructed them. But what is the impact? Now the program approach is now looking at what the impact of those schools is. We are not just looking at the structures you've put up, but have you improved the literacy rates in the community? What is the final outcome of your outputs? So actually that is the shift, and that is why I think this reform should be embraced. And of course we are just starting, but maybe in 2-3 years we should see the benefits, especially also coming from a reduction in maybe expenditures, avoiding duplication of some duties. Yeah, so this is what the NDP3 is supposed to. Okay, that is what was agreed in the NDP3, and in implementation we shall do that. And I think with time that should be able to lead us to what we desire. And of course also, when we are, usually you used to hear us getting very few marks from the National Planning Authority that our budget is not aligned to the NDP. To the NDP. Yeah, but clearly now we can see a clear linkage between our programs and the NDP3. So whatever we had projected as growth returns, say, from these investments in the plan, we actually see that the plan is now more linked to what we implement now. Yeah, so which I think is a good thing, because even now, and of course how we implement the plan is mainly implemented through the budget. So if it is aligned to these programs, which will cut duplication, cut, of course, working in silos, and of course focus more on outcomes and impact of our expenditure. Yeah, then I think in 2-3 years' time of implementing this approach, we should be able to see the benefits.
Katabazi, how about the accountability sector, the accountability sector itself and the accountability budget? Do we think we put in enough to help us recoup, or we even have so many accountability agencies that we do not need? But there is that also. We've always faulted ourselves on that particular accountability budget.
Now I think the accountability budget, in the way it is, in my view, should be able to support the accountability functions. Now, it also then depends on what we understand by the accountability function. So there are about 2 levels of accountability. So there is technical accountability and political accountability. Now, political accountability would look at, for instance, the councils, look at parliament, see how those institutions are supposed to follow up on the actions of the executive branch and ensure that money is spent very well. But also then the technical one, you would have now the Auditor General, internal audit, then you have the IGG coming in, and some other related agencies. So there is a concern, of course, that at the technical level, that there is an overlap of sorts. For example, when does the DPP come in? When does the IGG come in? When does the Nakarema institution come in?
State House and Corruption.
Yes, the State House and Corruption Unit, yes. So sometimes there is an overlap, sometimes there are coordination challenges, and that might create different centers and compromise the whole accountability question in that particular context. Of course, I know But the State House Anti-Corruption Unit then works more with the DPP. They can start the process, but then they hand over to DPP.
To the DPP.
Then you still have the IGG under the Anti-Corruption Act prosecuting most of the corruption cases. But again, my view would have been that for corruption specifically, the issue of enhancing capacity of one particular organization to be the one to do the lead would have been more productive than having efforts that are split.
Okay. I've just been told Mr. Alan Mujisha, the ED of Tax, Executive Director Tax at Ernst & Young, is also with us. Yes, Alan, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Alan, yes, go ahead and speak to us. We can hear you. We are discussing and previewing the budget. We just want to hear from you your thoughts on the budget that we're expecting this afternoon to be read to the country.
Yeah, thanks. Again, this budget, I see it more as a recovery budget from COVID, but also we need to reduce poverty and spur recovery from to attain the area projected growth levels of 7%, especially given that we've had a couple of challenges this year. And while we thought that COVID had more or less reduced the adverse impacts, we are seeing the next wave coming, and definitely this one is likely to affect our growth projections. But also again,
say it again.
Yeah, but also again, as the cost of public expenditure is quite high, and we need to redirect more expenditure towards productive sectors, so as fast track the recovery and the growth of the economy, and hence uplift our people from poverty.
Alan, the other issue here is the public debt that people keep talking about, and we've talked about it and discussed it. Every person has interpreted it in their own way. It will take us and our children and our grandchildren so many years to actually repay the public debt. What do you think can be done to mitigate that situation, especially whenever we get to discussions like this of our budget and finances?
Definitely, our public debt is coming across the ceiling of 50%, and this is quite worrying. If you look at the almost 30%, over 30% of our total expenditure of 44.7 billion is going towards refinancing, interest and debt repayment, and hence is something that we need to worry. But also we need to go to the root cause of the problem, where has this money been invested, and also ensure that we refinance some of the debt with higher concessional loans, but also at the same time we ensure that for the projects we do effective planning, so that by the time we get the loans, then this project should basically be ready to take off. But in a number of projects, I think there's been a couple of project delays, and hence we are paying interest on one side. On the other side, we are not getting value for money from some of the loans.
Have we done enough as a country to broaden the tax base to be able to manage our budgets whenever and wherever?
Again, my answer to that is if you look at the structure of our economy, the informal sector takes up a given percentage, and hence, to the extent that that informal sector is not contributing to our tax revenue, we've not done enough to broaden the tax base. But we know definitely right now there are some measures like digital taxation, which are meant to prevent us from a low and narrow tax base. The things like the likes of tax stamps, the likes of aggressive follow-up of the rental tax. But I think to me, the major sector that has not contributed positively to our tax revenue is agriculture. It's something that we need to look as a country and see how best do we monetize our subsistence sector for it to contribute positively to our tax base.
Okay, well, thank you, Alan. Ndugu Vuni here.
Yes.
The public did bit of it. Alan has said something about that, and we are running real too fast to the worst end of it. But let's address that, because the other thing also is when the experts here tell us we have a budget of so much trillion, so much trillion, so much trillion, and again here that much of that money is actually reservicing a public debt, then it also worries wananchi.
Yes, so first and foremost, maybe I need to talk about public debt in our context as Uganda and maybe sub-Saharan African countries. There's what we call fiscal space. Fiscal space in fiscal policy management is basically the capacity to increase maybe your expenditure to respond to a certain shock, or the capacity to have access to resources to handle an economic shock. It can be a health shock like we are seeing. So at the ministry, we undertake what we call a debt sustainability analysis annually, and we do our plans. And so looking at the reason for this slight increase over the 50%, although in the medium term we project that it will decline back to below 50. What was the reason? Of course, we saw all the shocks that happened, especially the pandemic that disrupted economic activity, and then our growth projections had to come down. Initially, earlier projections were above 6. Our economy was already growing at 6. Then, of course, for 2019-20, it grew at around 3%. Then maybe here, this financial year, we expected to grow at about 3.3%, which is also good, considering the disruptions, the supply chain disruptions, the demand side of it, societal disruption, people having to be contained at home. So what did this lead to? This led to, of course, a reduction in our revenue collections. Definitely, we collect taxes from the economy. So if economic activity is disrupted, then, of course, your revenues will come down. But now the other problem was, on top of revenues coming down, you're required to spend more to contain this health pandemic. So now, when we come back to the context of fiscal space, of course, like we said, we don't have a lot of fiscal space. So, but if you're even able to finance this extra required expenditure, but fiscal space, of course, you're able to finance it, but without jeopardizing what we call macroeconomic stability, without leading to instability within the economy where you have runaway inflation, because maybe you've borrowed from the domestic market, or maybe you've crowded out the private sector and further killed the private sector, you've crowded them out, then maybe they're also no longer investing because government, you're now the biggest borrower. So in all our projections, and as we do all this, we know that, yeah, public debt, we know it is, like we said, we undertake a debt sustainability analysis annually. We have all projects, even both in the medium term and the short term. And the way we see our trajectory, we shall go slightly above 50, especially next financial year. For now, we are still within 50. But after that, we shall do what we call fiscal consolidation. We are cutting back. We look forward to cutting back on our expenditure, especially through sequencing projects and deferring the non-core ones. At least we have consensus on that as government. The non-core projects, which maybe would require extra financing. Yeah. So then, of course, he talked of, going concessional. Concessional loans, of course, are the cheaper loans. But normally, the markets where you can easily get, say, concessional from multilateral agencies, they do not so much support maybe our development aspirations.
Okay.
For instance, they may fund maybe social sector spending.
Okay.
But for instance, if you want to build an oil road and we need it urgently, for instance, we have to evacuate this oil. We need an airport. And once we invest in this, these are high returns. So the money, especially the non-concessional debt, why we shall be able to come back to even below, is that our non-concessional debt is on projects that are high return and that are core, that we actually need them, for instance, to...
Not for recurrence.
It's not for recurrent spending.
That's very good.
Yeah, and of course, like this has been a shock, just of course to talk about, even if we just compared with our peers in the region, there are others who are already above 60% of GDP.
Of the GDP.
Debt, in terms of debt, and we are,
We'll end on that note, Ndugu Katabazi, or the public issue in there. The expert here from the ministry has tried to explain it to us. Let me hear from you.
My issue is that it is getting out of hand, and that has, in my view, significant implications. Because the net present value of debt under the East African currency convergence criteria was set at, and in consistence with our debt sustainability strategy, was pegged at 50%. Of that, 20% being a limit for domestic borrowing and 30% being the limit for external borrowing. Already, by December last year, the net present value of debt for the domestic borrowing was closing in on 19%. Now, the reason why it was pegged at 20% was that borrowing domestically has an implication on private sector lending. So if government moves from external lending and rather borrowing and focuses more on getting money from the local market, then it compromises opportunities that business persons have to get money from the bank. So for me, I think the appetite is so high. It is true, concessional loans still account for the biggest percentage of the loans that we have acquired externally, but also over the last 2 years, that figure has shrunk. Of course, for instance, about 2 years ago, we were at about 75%. Now we're at about 60-something%. So meaning that our appetite actually to run away from concession loans. He has given an explanation, but also one of the things that he possibly may not talk about is the fact that we are even now borrowing to pay salaries.
Which is terrible. On that note, I want us to get Alan finally. Alan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
We've run out of our time. In just 2 minutes, let's summit Alan on the budget that we're expecting tonight. Your final thoughts on it?
Well, thanks again. We know that we are in difficult times, and these difficult times require a lot of sacrifices. However, we know that also at the same time, some of the sacrifices that are required at this particular point may be politically unpopular, but I think we need to fast track our investment into the productive sector. We are seeing some amounts going into agro-industrialization. Let's basically do it professional and quite fast. The parish model investments, let's again ensure that that project is fast-tracked. And any of the investment that is that government needs to do for faster recovery of both the private sector and some of the other productive sectors, it must be fast-tracked so that then we can overcome some of these challenges and go back and fast-track our economic growth. But definitely it will not come easy, and we must do a lot of sacrifices. I wish the political wing could basically buy that idea and then invest into these productive sectors and cut back on some of the long-term investment and public expenditure.
Thank you so much, Alan.
The good news that we have oil. The good news we have oil coming on board. Again, that sector, if it can basically be fast-tracked, I'm sure it can positively contribute to our recovery. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Alan. From you, Patrick, in just 30 seconds to get out of studios, your final comments.
So I think let's be optimistic and let's hope that we defeat COVID-19. Because these disruptions that are coming up will definitely also disrupt economic activity. So if that is controlled, and with oil prospects becoming brighter, I think we will have a better country. Okay.
Finally, Derek Davis?
Yeah, finally, of course, I would like to say the budget is responsible to the needs of our current needs, especially at this time when we have COVID. And I'm sure you're going to see that in the short term, there are containment measures, and the budget is also focused on not losing the long-term objective as we focus on the short term.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank both of you gentlemen, Patrick Katabazi, the Executive Director, Center for Budget and Tax Policy. Thank you so much for joining us in studios. Thank you, Davis Vuningoma, Senior Economist in the Department of Macroeconomic Policy from the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. And of course, Mr. Alan Mugisha, the Executive Director, Tax at Ernst & Young, Uganda. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Wish you all the best. UBC TV promises the public that this afternoon, of course, we will bring the budget speech live to the comforts of wherever you will be. We implore you to stay tuned into UBC TV. We thank you so much. My name is Jaged Asemakola Ziksoka. Good morning and blessings.
Live from UBC Studios in